here as well, somewhere, don't know where, who works at Teen Challenge and has come down with Brian, so you could chat to him as well. It's been really helpful to hear that story. As I've been thinking about this subject of addiction, actually before I even knew I was going to be speaking on this subject, I've been beginning to read this book. It's a book that I actually really highly recommend by Russell Brand. It's called Freedom from Our Addictions. Russell Brand, well known for lots of things, but also well known because in his own life he was addicted to drugs, addicted to alcohol, and addicted to sexual behaviour that was destructive. And he's very open about that in the book. And so actually, I'd really want to say, this is probably the best Christian book not written by someone who professes to be a Christian that I've ever read. It's fantastic. There were so many bits of it that I've underlined, not always language that you might expect from a Christian writer, but in terms of the content of what he's saying, it's brilliant. It's really, really helpful. And actually, one of the reasons why I think that is the case is that what he does in the book is he takes the very well-known and popular 12-step guide of Alcoholics Anonymous and just explains how that helped him as a way of coming out of his own addictions. And if you know anything about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous or the 12-step guide, you'll know that it's rooted in a lot of Christian thinking, of biblical thoughts. A lot of those ideas and steps come directly from the teaching of Jesus and from the Bible. In fact, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, said about addiction this. He said, an addict needs two things, a spiritual experience and a supportive community. A spiritual experience and a supportive community. And it was those two things that shaped, in a big way, the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I do recommend that book, and I'll quote from that a little bit as we go through. But actually, we're getting ahead of ourselves, maybe, aren't we, in terms of this topic? We might need to actually step back and say to ourselves, what actually is addiction? What are we talking about here this evening? So let's just take a break, turn to those around you, maybe in twos or threes, and just discuss for a couple of minutes, how would you define addiction? What is it? And maybe what isn't it? So just take a couple of minutes now to discuss that with those around you, if you can, and if you'd like. Let's pause there for a second. We won't go around with the roving mic and ask you, because that will take too long, but I wonder what kind of things you thought about, and maybe what you discovered as you started to discuss is it's not always very easy, is it, to just wrap up addiction in a one-sentence definition. Is addiction something I have to do all the time? Well, I have to breathe all the time to stay alive, but we wouldn't talk about breathing as being addicted. Am I addicted to tea because I have it every morning? Well, that's debatable, isn't it? Can I not have it tomorrow morning? There are different questions about what addiction is and isn't. Maybe this definition is a helpful definition. Addiction is a condition in which a person engages in a use of a substance or in a behaviour of which the rewarding effects provide a compelling incentive to repeatedly pursue the behaviour despite detrimental consequences. I think that maybe wraps it up quite helpfully. It's not just addicted to doing something repeatedly, but doing something repeatedly that ultimately, although at the beginning might be attractive and rewarding, ultimately, down the line at some point, becomes destructive. Addiction. And actually, to begin with, what I want to do is just look at two myths around addiction that we might have, two popular ideas that we might be thinking of when we talk about addiction. And the first is this: addiction is a problem that only some people or certain types of people have. I think potentially tonight, already some of us have slipped into this myth. See, we've sat here and we've heard someone talk about addiction to drugs and different substances, and immediately we've put this in a world that's out there. That certain people have, addiction, a problem that certain people have in certain places that has nothing to do with us. But actually, I want to say, addiction can be far more, can't it, than just addiction to substances or alcohol or drugs. Addiction can take on all sorts of things, to pornography, to sex, to gambling, to work, to social media, to our phones, to the internet, to food. There are so many different things that can be addictive and we can be addicted to. I think one of the dangers is we see addiction as a problem that other people could have and not something that we would ever struggle with. Because maybe the addictions that we would be likely to struggle with are more subtle or not so immediately destructive, but ultimately still dangerous. Actually, this is something that Russell Brand says very helpfully in his book. He says, we are all on the addiction scale. Those of us with clear-cut, blatant substance abuse are in many ways the lucky ones. We alcoholics and junkies have minimized our mystery to a tiny cycle of craving and fulfillment. Our pattern is easier to observe and therefore, with commitment and help, easier to resolve. But what he says actually is that, in a sense, all of us by nature will become addicted to something. And the problem is, for many people, it takes them their whole lives to realize what it is. And by that point, it's too late. They've realized too late that it couldn't really satisfy, too late that it couldn't really meet those needs, and so on. So when we think about addiction, don't just think of the drug addict. Think about something that we can be all prone to, you and me. That's the first myth. And the second myth I want to say is this, that addiction is a disease. Now, I want to be careful here because in some ways, addiction in many ways can present like a disease and there can be comparisons. But one of the dangers in talking about addiction as a disease is that we kind of sense that maybe some people are just inherently born that way, or some people kind of just catch it, like we catch the flu or we catch a cold and stuff like that. But actually, nobody's story goes this way. I was a happy person walking down the street, everything was great in life, and then I just tripped on a paving slab and I landed head first in a pile of crack. And I sniffed it by accident, and ever since then I've been a drug addict. That doesn't happen, does it? It just doesn't happen to you from outside. Actually, there are probably a whole series of things that happen to you and also choices that we make that can lead to addiction. Now, it may well be that in the experience of addiction, we feel powerless to do anything about it, but there are choices that lead to it. And actually, I think this is quite a helpful thing to remember. You see, if addiction is just a disease that we did nothing about and our choices had nothing to lead to, then in one sense we are a victim of it and there's nothing we can do to get out of it. But if choices led to the addiction, then in a sense, right choices could also lead out of it. There can be hope out of the addictive behaviour. So those are two myths that we might say there are about addiction. But why do we end up becoming addictive? Why is it that people end up in addiction? And of course the answer is manifold. There are different reasons, aren't there? Sometimes addictions come about because we're trying to escape painful experiences. Maybe addictions come about because we're trying to find answers to some of the big problems of life. Maybe addictions come about because we're searching for something that will give life significance and meaning. And in a sense, that's all of us, isn't it? All of us are trying to find satisfaction in life. All of us are trying to find answers to the big problems of our lives. All of us are trying to find comfort where there's pain. All of us do that. The problem is, where do we look for answers? And again, what Russell Brand helpfully says in his book is that if we look for those answers in material things, they will always disappoint. He says, my experience, though, refused to verify the myth of my culture, The fame did not fulfill, the sex did not fulfill, nor the money, the glamour, or the evanescent power. None of it could get inside to where I truly resided. Within, I remained alone. Because actually the problem is all of these things that I looked to didn't really meet that need. It might have been nice for a while, but they didn't really sort out the problem. So we have this yearning, this searching, but where do we look to find answers? Well, I want us to look tonight, just briefly, at a few words that Jesus spoke that I think relate to this subject of addiction and that will be helpful for us and helpful as we seek to help others as well. And these words that he speaks in John's Gospel, in John chapter 8, but they're on the screen, so you don't need to look them up. Jesus speaking to a group of religious leaders, in fact, the last kind of group of people that would have thought that they were in any way as addicted or having any kind of problems like this, said this. Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Actually, the first thing that Jesus says there is actually quite shocking, particularly bearing in mind the people he's speaking to, respectable, upstanding, religious people, like maybe some of us would like to think of ourselves. He says, actually, you're not free. All of us, he could have used the word addicted, but he takes a different analogy. He says, we're slaves. We're all slaves. And so the first step to freedom that Jesus talks about is actually to recognize, conversely, that you're not. To admit that you're not free. Sometimes we can think that we're free, can't we? But actually, it's only later that we realize that we're not. I mean, to lighten the mood for a moment, this came to me a few years ago. Some of you heard the story before, but I'll repeat it again. When I first learnt to ski, in America. I was dating a girl 15 years ago at the time out there who went skiing every year with her family, and they generously invited me to go and join them on their skiing holiday. The only problem was I had never been skiing in my life. And so I went just down the road to the Matcham's dry ski slope and ordered 3 hours of ski lessons, thinking that this would solve the problem, that I would then be a pro, and that the holiday would go more smoothly. I went to the lessons at Matcham's, and they taught you how to do a snowplow. In fact, that's pretty much all they taught you to do for 3 weeks. Each week, they just taught you how to stop, which, to be honest, didn't particularly attract me, because I could see these people whizzing down the slope, and I thought, no, I don't want to stop, I want to go. I don't need to do a snowplow, I need to learn how to ski. And so I have to confess, I didn't remember much or pay attention to much of these lessons. A few months later, January rolled around, I got on the plane, flew out to Colorado, and I was excited because finally I was free to ski and to do what I wanted. And we hired the skis, and we got to the resort, we got on the chairlift, and we started going up the mountain. Now at this point, I did start to realize that the mountain was quite a lot higher than the dry ski slope down at Matcham's. But I was still excited, because I was excited that I was now free and I was going to be able to ski, and everything was great. Got to the top of the mountain, we disembarked the chairlift without any problem, and I thought, well, this is the point where I'll just stop, make sure my skis are put on properly and my boots are done up properly, and then I'll be ready to show everyone what I'm made of and impress the family. And so I thought, well, at first I need to stop, but then I thought, well, I'm not actually sure how to stop, because of course, that was the bit of the lesson I hadn't listened to. But it wasn't too problematic, because I was still just sliding very slowly across the top of the kind of fairly flat area of the top of the mountain. But before long, I was getting to the edge of the actual ski run proper, and I was still moving, and I still hadn't worked out how to stop. And before long, I was actually on the red run, picking up speed, kind of flying down this slope. All the time I'm thinking, how do I stop? How do I stop? How do I stop? Now, even if you've not been skiing, you could probably think of a decent way that you could stop pretty quickly. But I didn't want to fall over, because I thought that would be embarrassing. So I thought I need to work out how to stop without falling over. And to the side of the piste, I could see this forest. I thought to myself, if only I could ski into that forest and grab those trees, I could stop myself without falling over. So that's what I did. I went off the piste, through the off-piste, into the forest, and smack into the nearest tree. I'm lying flat on my back, bruises from head to toe. My girlfriend and her family all come and ski over and say, "What were you trying to do?" And I said, "Well, I was trying to stop." She said, "Didn't they teach you how to stop?" I said, "Yes, but I wasn't paying attention to that part of the lesson." She said, "Well, if you can't remember how to stop, just fall over," which is what I did for the rest of the day. I went down the mountain, faster, faster fall, faster, faster fall, faster, faster fall. In fact, I was so bad that by nightfall, I was still halfway down the mountain, and they had to send one of those ski-doos up to rescue me, take me down to the bottom of the mountain. And the next day, they took me to the nursery slopes and gave me lessons with the 3-year-olds. And finally, I learned how to do a snowplow. And then for the rest of the week, I tried to make up for lost time, flying down every black run on the resort in a snowplow formation, looking rather out of control. I was kind of hoping I'd have made up for lost time by the end of the week and that everything would be okay. It wasn't, sadly. Well, not sadly now, but a few weeks later, she dumped me and she ended up dating a ski instructor about a month later, and she married him before the year was out. But the whole purpose of that story is to say, I thought I was free going up that mountain. I thought I've got no restrictions, no one to tell me what to do. I don't have a ski instructor to tell me how to stop. I can do what I like. But actually I wasn't. I very quickly discovered I wasn't. I discovered I was under control of something else called gravity. And gravity was taking me where gravity wanted me to go, and I had no control over it. And addiction, slavery is a bit like that. We start out and we think, hey, I'm in control. This feels great. But very quickly, actually, we realize, actually, we're not in control. We're being controlled by something else. And it's not so great. The thing that, to begin with, gave us satisfaction or enjoyment or release or control doesn't give what it used to, but it presents bigger demands. And so Jesus says the first step to freedom is actually to recognize that you're not. Which isn't very politically correct, is it, in our culture? Because we're told, aren't we, in our culture, again and again, you're free to do what you want. You have the power inside yourself to achieve your dreams. Just look inside yourself, believe in yourself, and you can do it. And actually, the answer that Jesus gives is, no, you can't. You're not free. Actually, that's the first step to the Alcoholics Anonymous guide. Step number 1, admit that you've got a problem and that you can't sort it out yourself. Admit you've got a problem. So Jesus says you need to recognize that you're not free. But secondly, he says you need to recognize that he can set you free. Jesus says, I can set you free. Now again, it's interesting. If you read the Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step guide, and Russell Brand talks about this in the book, he says one of the things it talks about famously is you need to look for a higher power. It doesn't use the word God. And in many ways, in that course, it says that higher power can be whatever you want it to be. But I think it's interesting that it is, in a sense, spiritual, because addiction, I want to say, is a spiritual problem. See, another word that we could call addiction, a Bible word, would be idolatry. And that is to say that to be addicted to something means basically you have made an idol out of something, a god out of something. Basically, the things that we are addicted to are the things that we ultimately live for, ultimately worship, ultimately run our lives around. And the Bible says, in one sense, all of us are naturally going to do that with something or someone. It's idolatry. And the problem is, the gods that we create, these little g gods, aren't very good at meeting those needs. David Foster Wallace was an American writer. And speaking, actually, sadly, just a few months before his own tragic death, he said this. He said, here's something else that's weird but true. In the day-to-day trenches of adult life, there's actually no such thing as atheism. There's no such thing as not worshipping. Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what we worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, you'll never have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you'll always feel ugly. And when time and age start showing, you'll die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. He says, actually, all of us live for some kind of God, but the gods that we live for will end up destroying us. And it doesn't have to be heroin. It can be success. It can be your work. It can be your own image of your body. It can be anything. And so the answer is to the problem of addiction and idolatry, not just to get rid of it, but to replace that small g God with a big G God, with a God who really can. With a God who really can meet the needs that those other things can't. But what I want to say is that this God is not just some vague higher power. The God who can really help us, as we heard so wonderfully from Brian earlier, is not just a vague idea of some spiritual force, but Jesus. He is the one that can ultimately help us, as we've heard in that story. See, what did Jesus say? He said this, if the Son, that's a way of referring to himself, by the way. He says, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. Jesus says, I'm the one that can really bring you freedom. I guess the question is, how can Jesus bring that kind of freedom? And I just want to look at it in some different ways. How can Jesus bring freedom? Firstly, I think this. Jesus brings freedom because he offers us real forgiveness. He offers us real forgiveness. All of us in life can carry regrets of things that have happened in the past, things that we did, a sense of shame and guilt. Sometimes we try and escape from that by blocking those thoughts out. Maybe for some, even their path to addiction was a way of trying to escape the guilt or the shame that they felt. But Jesus wonderfully says, I'm the one that can bring you forgiveness. Forgiveness from your guilt, and also forgiveness and setting you free from your shame. Jesus, who not only lived, died, and rose again, and took all of our guilt and all of our wrong and all of our shame so that we don't have to carry it. He took our place so that we can have that fresh start, so we can have that new beginning, not carrying a heavy rucksack of guilt and regrets on our back through life, but leaving it with him and walking in the freedom that he can give. So Jesus can bring us forgiveness for the past. But secondly, Jesus can help us to forgive others. Because actually one of the things that can enslave us in life can be the bitterness that we can feel to others by the way that they've hurt us. And often that's true, isn't it? Many of us in different ways have been hurt by others in life. We look back at people around us, maybe people close to us, even family members, who we carry bitterness and resentment towards because of what they've done. And actually, one of the things we need to do is know the freedom, not only of experiencing the forgiveness that God can give us for when we have done that to others, but also experience the freedom of forgiving others for what they have done to us. Interestingly, in Bran's book, he talks in a whole chapter about the people that he thought about that had hurt him in different ways. He made a massive inventory of all the people, from big things to the person who sexually abused him, to small, seemingly insignificant things to others. You know, someone who said something once and they probably forgot about it. And all of these things. And he had to experience releasing the bitterness and guilt and offering forgiveness. By the way, let me just say, forgiveness has two parts. It needs to be offered and received. Our part is we need to be willing to offer it. It's not always received, but we do our part and we release the bitterness. So Jesus can bring freedom by giving us forgiveness and helping us to forgive. Thirdly, Jesus can bring freedom because he gives us his power to change. And again, as we're hearing Brian's story, we've heard that, haven't we? What was it that happened at Teen Challenge that didn't happen in everything else? It was Jesus. That was the difference. Not just historic Jesus who lived 2,000 years ago and died 2,000 years ago and that's the end of the story, but a Jesus who's also alive and in business and can get involved in our lives today. A Jesus who says that by his Spirit he wants to come in and change us and empower us and help us so that we can walk with him daily in relationship. Yeah, we'll still face that drag and that pull of desire to do the wrong thing, but now there's a new force, a new desire, a new power to go the right way. In fact, the Bible says this of Christians. It says if someone is following Jesus, the same power that raised Jesus to life, the same power behind the resurrection of Jesus is now at work in your life. That's the power that you have if you're a Christian. So we're not left on our own. It's not you're forgiven for the past and now go and try harder in your own ability. Because if that's the case, we'll fail again and again and again. is saying, no, I can't do this myself. But I found the one who can. I found the one who's going to be with me. I found the one who daily is going to give me strength. He gives us himself through life. And then fourthly, Jesus invites us into a supportive community. It's interesting, at the beginning I mentioned Carl Jung. Carl Jung said the two things that people need in addiction are a spiritual experience of transformation and a community, a supportive community where they can be helped to change. In many ways, Alcoholics Anonymous groups exist in that kind of community. People find that community where they can be open, where they can share, where they can be honest about their problems, and they can be helped by other people who are also honest about theirs. And it sounds really attractive, doesn't it? Wouldn't it be wonderful to be in this community where everyone is humble, everyone's honest about their problems, everyone can help each other with their problems, no one's saying they're better than anyone else? That'd be great, wouldn't it? Actually, that's what the church is meant to be. And that's what the church at its best is. A community where we're all on the same level. I said at the beginning, we're not saying there are some people over here that have this problem and the rest of us, we're fine. We're saying actually, we're all by nature slaves and addicts. We all need Jesus, maybe expressed in different ways. Our struggles aren't your struggles. My challenges maybe not be yours. But we've all got the same ultimate problem. We found the ultimate answer in Jesus. That's what the church is meant to be. And actually, if you read through the New Testament part of the Bible, that's what the church is commanded to be, a place where people can admit their sins, a place where people can encourage each other, a place where people can support each other and pray for each other and help each other. The reality is actually that most of those things that the New Testament talks about as what a church should do, we can't actually do on a Sunday service. Because we sit here in rows and we listen to someone at the front speak and we sing songs, and those are good things. But actually, lots of the things that a church also needs to be, we can't do in that context. That's why actually church is not just about what we do sitting on a Sunday morning or evening if we come twice, but actually church is about the relationships that we have, the small groups that many of us attend, but not even just that. The friendships, the one-to-one meetups, the conversations, the prayers that we share for each other. A community where we can be honest. Are we like that? We are. Yeah, one of the most wonderfully encouraging things in life is when you share your problem with someone and they say, actually, I've also struggled with the same thing. And you go, I'm not alone. Someone else has been through this. They know what it's like. So let's be a church like that, where people are welcome to be honest, where they're not looked down on because they realize actually we're all in the same boats. We're in that community. Jesus invites us into a community, a supportive community. And then lastly, I want to say this. Jesus invites us to have a new purpose in life. You see, there's two parts of freedom that we need to think about. Freedom is not just the freedom from something bad, but it also has to be the freedom for something good. In Luke's gospel, Jesus talks about a person as being like a house. And he says, imagine this house that's demon-possessed. And the demons are cast out of the house. And they go all over the place. And then they come back and they found that the house is now clean and empty and there's nothing in it. And it's all tidied up. So what do? Jesus says they go and find 7 worse demons than themselves and they come back and take control of the house. Kind of strange bit of Jesus' teaching that we don't often talk about. But actually, what is Jesus saying in that? I think he's saying this. It's not enough just to get rid of the stuff in our life that is wrong. We've got to replace it with something that's right. Otherwise, it'll just get filled up by something that's potentially even worse. That's often the problem with addiction. We get rid of one addiction by ending up with another. I was hearing recently someone who was talking to a lady who was very honestly sharing her kind of struggles and ultimately how she came to faith in Jesus. But she was saying basically her problem was that she was addicted to just serial relationships with guys that just were not good for her, not good for them. And she just knew it, but she just couldn't get out of it. She just went through one relationship to another. She said, I'm just addicted to it. So she went to a counselor and she said, look, this is my problem. This is what I am doing. I'm just addicted to these relationships. They're destructive. I want to get out of it. So the counselor said, you know what you need to do? You need to get a job that's more fulfilling. You need to throw yourself into your work. You need to really get excited about your career. You need to do that and live for that. That will help you with the problem of your relationships. And she said to this counselor, by the point, well, she wasn't yet at this point a Christian, but she said to the counselor, she says, so what you're saying is I just replace one bad God with another bad God. That's often what we do. We get rid of one problem by just taking on something else, which in a different way will be destructive. So Jesus says, don't just get rid of what's bad, but fill it with something that's good. Actually find your purpose in life. Find that actually God has got a purpose for you. He wants you to be an agent of change and good. He wants you to be someone who can help others. He wants you to be a part of changing this world. He wants you to use your God-given gifts and abilities to be a blessing, so that life isn't all about you, but actually you've been set free to see it's about God and about serving others. And again, wonderfully, Russell Brand talks about how in his life he's discovered that actually one of the biggest liberating things is to realize that life isn't about him and that he's got something that he can do with his life that can help others. Ultimately, I want to say that's exactly what God wants of us, to realize that each one of us uniquely has something that God has called us to bless and serve and help others. We've got a calling in life. So Jesus can set us free. So just before we wrap up this part and I hand back to Miles, let me wrap it up by saying two things. Firstly, I guess my first question would be this. Do you know that kind of freedom in your life? You may not call yourself an addict in those terms, but have you actually discovered that real freedom that Jesus offers? As I said, in one sense, Jesus is saying all of us by nature are addicted or enslaved to something. And the things that we look for will never ultimately satisfy. But have you found that ultimate satisfaction, that ultimate freedom, that real forgiveness, that definite purpose that Jesus can bring in your life? And if you haven't, I want to invite you to discover that for yourself, because that is what Jesus offers. That's what many of us have discovered. And the thing that you desperately need, it's not a thing, it's a person. It's not just a higher power, it's Jesus. He's the one that can really set you free. And if you want to know more about that, if you want to talk about that, come and chat to me or Miles or Brian. Chat to someone who came with you. Or if you're watching this online or later on, just get in touch with the church. Send us an email. We'd love to chat more. We'd love to help you discover what this freedom can look like. But secondly, I want to say this. I guess many of us here tonight would say, yeah, I do know that freedom. I have discovered that. I do know Jesus, and this is wonderful. What has this got to do with us? Let me say two things. Firstly, continue to live in that freedom. Because just because you became a Christian and put your trust in Jesus doesn't mean you're not now prone to addiction. Actually, Brian very honestly and helpfully said that even after going through that first course, he found himself slipping back into old ways because he realized that actually every day we need Jesus. Every day we need his grace, and every day we need his power in our lives. It's not enough just to say, I did something a few years ago and now No, we need Jesus today. We need to recognize every day that without Jesus we're powerless, and that he is the only one that can ultimately help us. Do you live that way? Or is there a danger that actually we've become a bit complacent? We need to live in that freedom. And maybe we just need to take stock and say, are there things in my life that are unhelpful? It may be seemingly small, but actually, do I need to address certain things? Are there behaviours that actually I find that I can't live without and ultimately are not being helpful to me? And I need to start to address them. I'll give you one example, okay? A couple of years ago, I was just very aware that I was checking my phone all the time. Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. The problem was I wasn't really aware of it for a long time. I was doing it, but it's, we all do, don't we? Like, it's just what happens in life. And then I remember particularly I was at a conference in Central Asia, of all places. And I was in this kind of big Twitter discussion with someone I'd never met, like you do on Twitter. And then at the end of the day, thought to myself, hang on a minute, I've been addicted to replying to all these messages all day on my phone, and I've not really engaged in where I am, and actually, is this helpful? It started me to think, actually, maybe my usage of things like social media and my checking of the internet, although it wasn't anything dodgy or bad in itself, wasn't being helpful. It wasn't helping me engage in the place I was at and the people that were around me. And so I started to think, maybe I need to do something about it. For me, that meant actually fasting from social media in certain ways, that in one sense just addressed that. Now, that's just one example. But there might be all sorts of things we just need to say in life, hang on a minute, are there things here that I need to bring? Problems that could be growing. I need to live in freedom. But one other thing I just want to say is this. If you've discovered freedom in Jesus, then you have discovered the thing that ultimately everybody in the world needs. Whoever they are, whether they're addicted to heroin, or whether they're addicted to their work, whatever they are, whoever they are, you know what the answer is. I think sometimes when we think about a subject like addiction tonight, we can immediately think, gosh, this is for the professionals, right? This is for people not like me. You know, if I meet someone who's struggling in any sense of any kind of addiction, I'll just send them off to Teen Challenge. Well, that might be a very helpful thing to do. And can I say very carefully tonight, there's a real place for professional help and experienced help for certain people in certain things. I'm not saying that's bad. It's good. But actually, if you know Jesus, you do know the answer. The ultimate answer to the ultimate problem that everybody in the world has. So remember that. Actually, you have got something that can help everybody you know. It's called Jesus. It's called his freedom and his forgiveness and his empowerment. So don't be afraid to share that with whoever you meet and whatever they're struggling with. And yes, it might be appropriate to also point them to others that can help them in specific and specialized ways, but also don't be minimizing the help that you can bring. Because you have got the answer. And he's wonderful, and he's powerful. And we don't need to be ashamed about it, do we? So let me pray before I hand back to Miles. Heavenly Father, we thank you. Thank you for the freedom that Jesus offers. Thank you, Lord, that many of us tonight can say that we've experienced that freedom ourselves. But Lord, I pray that you'd help us to walk in that freedom and to live in that freedom day by day, walking closely with you, Jesus, knowing the filling of your powerful Holy Spirit every day in our lives. And help us to be those who want to share that message